the sea has always been a source of wonder and fear for humanity. Throughout history, strange disappearances, cursed places, legends of sunken civilizations, and sounds emanating from the depths that no one can fully explain have been recorded. So, get comfortable and turn off the lights, because these are 7 unsolved mysteries of the sea. How are you? Good morning, afternoon, or evening. I greet you. Let's begin. The mystery of Flight 19. On the sunny afternoon of the 5th of December 1945, 5 Grumman TBM Avenger torpedo bombers of the United States Navy took off from the Naval Air Station in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, for a routine training flight. On board were 14 young airmen under the command of an experienced instructor, Lieutenant Charles Carroll Taylor. The mission seemed simple: fly east over the Atlantic Ocean, then north, conduct practice bombing runs, and finally return home. The weather was good, and nothing seemed to foreshadow what was about to happen. However, shortly after completing the first part of this route, the pilots began to report problems. Taylor, the leader of the squadron, communicated by radio that their compasses were not functioning correctly and that they had become disoriented. In 1945, there was no GPS, and the airmen relied entirely on their compass and stopwatch to navigate. To make matters worse, Taylor apparently was not wearing a watch that day. So, surrounded by uniform sky and sea, with no reference points, the pilots were flying blind over the vast Atlantic. The messages captured revealed the growing anguish of Lieutenant Taylor and his men. And as time passed, fuel was also dangerously low. At one point, Taylor announced a desperate plan. When the first plane had less than 10 gallons of fuel, everyone had to prepare for an emergency landing. Confused transmissions were heard, with the airmen saying things like, "Everything looks strange. Even the ocean looks different." It was as if the world around them had changed. Communication then became intermittent and fragmented until finally, static swallowed the voices. Flight 19 disappeared without a trace over the famous Bermuda Triangle. The loss of 5 military aircraft in peacetime immediately triggered a massive search and rescue operation. That same night, a Martin PBM Mariner seaplane with 13 crew members took off to search for the missing. But tragically, shortly after starting this search, this seaplane also disappeared from radar. Witnesses on a nearby ship reported seeing an explosion in the air and burning debris falling into the sea, suggesting that the rescue plane may have exploded in midair. No survivors were ever found, neither from the 14 airmen of Flight 19, nor from the 13 rescuers of the Mariner. The United States Navy conducted an official investigation. Initially, the report concluded that Lieutenant Taylor had mistaken small islands for the Florida Keys, leading them by mistake out to sea, far from the coast. It is believed that Taylor, disoriented and with faulty instruments, led his squadron into the open ocean until their fuel ran out. The planes would have made forced landings one after another, sinking into deep waters, dragged by the Gulf Stream. However, Taylor's family protested this verdict that blamed the pilot, and the Navy modified the final report to declare the cause as unknown. Regarding the Mariner seaplane, it was determined that it had likely suffered an accidental explosion in midair due to fuel vapors, as these planes had a reputation as flying bombs for storing large amounts of fuel. Despite these official explanations, many people remained unsatisfied. Dozens of ships and planes had been sent to scour the entire area without success, and in the following years, researchers and writers fueled the intrigue. A 1964 article first coined the term Bermuda Triangle to refer to the area of the disappearance, and in 1974, writer Charles Berlitz published a popular book attributing the case to mysterious forces that were beyond any conventional explanation. Some blamed alleged magnetic anomalies in the triangle, portals to another dimension, or even extraterrestrial abductions. It was even speculated that the pilots might have emerged in another time or place. Of course, none of these ideas have solid proof, but they illustrate very well how Flight 19 became synonymous with a marine mystery. The most accepted explanation remains the simplest. The planes were lost due to a fatal combination of human error and instrumental failure, running out of fuel and sinking into the Atlantic. The waters where they disappeared can reach thousands of meters in depth, hiding the remains forever. But undoubtedly, the fact that 5 planes and a rescue seaplane vanished on the same day without leaving a palpable trace remains, at the very least, strange and disturbing. To date, Flight 19 remains an unsolved enigma and holds its place in history as the incident that gave rise to the ominous legend of the Bermuda Triangle. the Devil's Sea or Dragon's Triangle. We now travel halfway around the world to the coasts of Japan, where another marine triangle shrouded in mystery is found. We are talking about the Devil's Sea. This region of the Pacific Ocean, located around the Japanese island of Miyake, about 100 kilometers south of Tokyo, has been compared to the Bermuda Triangle due to strange disappearances of ships and planes attributed to its waters. Local fishermen call it Ma no Umi, Devil's Sea. In Japanese, a name that comes from ancient legends about creatures or evil forces lurking beneath its waves. The sinister reputation of the Dragon's Triangle is not recent. There are stories dating back hundreds of years. It is said that in ancient times, Japanese sailors avoided those waters because, according to folklore, sea dragons emerged to sink ships, hence its nickname. Some link this area to historical accounts of the Mongol invaders under Kublai Khan, whose attempt to conquer Japan in the 13th century failed when their fleets were destroyed by typhoons. Although those typhoons were natural phenomena, the idea that supernatural forces protected those waters remained in the popular imagination. Between 1950 and 1954, at least 9 ships disappeared or sank mysteriously in this area of the Pacific. These losses drew attention because, according to reports of the time, the ships maintained normal radio communication, did not face bad weather, nor did they report mechanical failures, yet they disappeared suddenly. The situation became so concerning that, according to accounts, the Japanese government itself decided to take action. Thus, in 1952, it allegedly funded the sending of a research ship with more than 30 scientists and experts on board to study the area and find out what was happening. This expedition set sail aboard the ship Kaiyo Maru no. 5 with the hope of obtaining scientific data on possible geological or magnetic anomalies in the area. Unfortunately, the fate of this mission was equally tragic. The Kaiyo Maru No. 5 never returned, lost at sea with all its occupants. Japan then declared the Devil's Sea a danger zone, reinforcing the image of a cursed place for navigation. These facts were compiled years later by the American writer Charles Berlitz, the same one who popularized the Bermuda Triangle. In 1989, Berlitz published the book, The Dragon's Triangle. The writer's stories painted the Dragon's Triangle as a place where the laws of physics seemed to be suspended, ships that vanished in an instant, entire crews swallowed by the sea without a trace, and even rumors that time stopped there, or that strange luminous mists appeared out of nowhere. However, subsequent investigations have cast doubt on this dark narrative. Researcher Larry Couchet reviewed the data and concluded that many of the reported disappearances were not as extraordinary, nor did they occur exactly within the triangle. For example, the alleged military vessels that Berlitz mentioned turned out to be mostly fishing boats, a type of vessel that sadly gets lost frequently in the seas of Japan due to storms and other normal dangers. In fact, hundreds of fishing boats are lost annually in the Western Pacific, so the 9 disappearances of the early 50s, while tragic, could not be statistically abnormal. As for the Kaiyo Maru no. 5 and its scientists, the official explanation is that the ship was destroyed by the eruption of a submarine volcano called Myojin Sho on the 24th of September 1952. The Kaiyo Maru was precisely studying that volcano when it erupted violently beneath the ship, breaking it into pieces. Some remains of the hull were later found, confirming the cause of the disaster. The Pacific around Japan is geologically very active, with submarine volcanoes and earthquakes capable of generating treacherous waves and other natural threats. With these clarifications, the Devil's Sea might seem less mysterious than once thought. Many of its incidents can be attributed to natural phenomena such as submarine volcanoes, sudden tsunamis, unexpected typhoons, or powerful ocean currents capable of diverting and capsizing ships. However, the aura of mystery persists. The ancient legends about sea dragons, added to the comparisons with the Bermuda Triangle, keep the myth alive, and day after day new strange stories about inexplicable events arise in those waters. That is why this Japanese triangle continues to intrigue those who venture to navigate its unsettling waters. Atlantis. Of all the marine mysteries, perhaps none has captured the imagination as much as the legendary Atlantis, the mythical island continent that supposedly disappeared under the ocean in a remote past. Unlike the previous cases, this mystery does not arise from a modern event with records, but from an ancient account, a mixture of history and myth. that for millennia has fueled searches and endless theories. The story of Atlantis comes from the Greek philosopher Plato, who described it in detail in two of his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, written around 360 BC. In them, Plato presents Atlantis as a great island located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, that is, beyond the Strait of Gibraltar in the Atlantic Ocean. According to the account, Atlantis was a powerful empire larger than Libya and Asia Minor combined, 9,000 years before the time of Solon, which would place its existence near 9,600 BC. Atlantis dominated other lands but succumbed in a war against ancient Athens. In the climax of this story, the gods punished Atlantean arrogance. In a single terrible day and night, the entire island sank under the sea due to a devastating cataclysm. After its disappearance, the waters became unnavigable, filled with mudbanks, Plato says, so that maritime routes toward the outer ocean were blocked, and thus, Atlantis fell into oblivion, remembered only in ancient Egyptian chronicles that, according to Plato, were passed on to the Greek legislator Solon and then to Critias, the narrator of the dialogue. Plato insisted it was a true story and described with astonishing detail the topography of the island, its capital with concentric rings of land and channels, its shimmering temples, and its armies. All this wealth of information led many readers to believe that Atlantis had to be real, and throughout the centuries there have been countless speculations about its location and whether it exists or not. However, from the beginning, there were also those who interpreted the narrative as a philosophical allegory. In more recent times, especially at the end of the 19th century and during the Romantic period, Atlantis captured popular attention again. Researchers, enthusiasts, and writers began to identify this place with all kinds of real sites. A theory quite accepted among some scientists is that the legend of Atlantis could have been inspired by the catastrophe of the island of Thera in the Aegean Sea, which housed a prosperous civilization linked to the Minoan Crete and was devastated around 1,600 BC by a gigantic volcanic eruption that sank much of the island underwater. It is easy then to see the parallels, an advanced society destroyed almost overnight by a maritime disaster. Although the times do not match what Plato said, it is possible that the story of that eruption, transmitted through myths, arrived deformed to the time of Plato. However, serious archaeological research has not found evidence of a historical Atlantis, as Plato described it. Many historians consider Atlantis a literary invention of Plato used to illustrate his ideas about ideal and corrupt societies rather than a real place. On the other hand, the lack of tangible proof has never stopped enthusiasts. During the 20th and 21st centuries, there have been numerous attempts to find this place. Explorers have scoured the Atlantic Ocean in search of submerged ruins. Some have pointed to underwater structures near the Azores, others to the alleged walls found on the seabed near Bimini in the 1960s. Alternative theories abound. Some paint Atlantis as an extremely advanced civilization, perhaps with technologies that would exceed even current ones obtained from mysterious sources, and there are those who talk about energy crystals, ancient flying machines, and even the influence of beings from another world on the Atlanteans, presenting this place almost as a branch of a very ancient alien civilization. In the realm of science, the most reasonable idea is that Plato used elements of real catastrophes to give plausibility to his account, but Atlantis itself would be a fictional place. Even so, it is remarkable how its story resonates. Practically every year some news arises that they finally found Atlantis. But so far, this place remains undiscovered and continues to be one of the great mysteries of the sea. By the way, if you are enjoying this type of content, we remind you that you can now listen to Catastrofico, our new exclusive podcast on Podimo. There we talk about the most shocking tragedies in history like never before, and we do it without censorship. We release a new episode every Monday, and you can join easily through the link in the description, in the pinned comment, and on all our social networks. Thank you very much. The ghost island of Hy-Brasil. We move from a lost city to a ghost island that for centuries appeared on real maps but that no one can find. The enigmatic Hy-Brasil. This is the name of a supposed island located in the North Atlantic, west of the coast of Ireland, which was mentioned in Celtic legends and drawn by cartographers during the Middle Ages and the Modern Age, although it no longer appears on any map today. The first recorded appearance of this island on a map dates back to 1,325 inches nautical charts, where it was located in the Atlantic and named as Brazil, or Hy-Brasil. During the following centuries, The island continued to appear on European maps, for example, in the famous Catalan Atlas of 1375, and in maps by the renowned cartographer Gerardus Mercator in the 16th century. It was usually represented as a small round island, sometimes split in two, located approximately 320 kilometers west of Ireland. Irish legends about Hy-Brasil abound. It was said that the island was almost always hidden by a thick fog, invisible to sailors except on rare occasions. Once every 7 years, according to the myth, the fog would lift and the idyllic island would briefly appear on the horizon. But even at those moments, it proved impossible to reach. If a ship approached, it would be enveloped by the mist again and disappear like a mirage. Hy-Brasil was described as a fertile and utopian land. Some called it the Island of Eternal Youth or the Island of Bliss, where abundance reigned and its inhabitants enjoyed incredible longevity. Local tales spoke of wise priests or nuns living there with ancestral knowledge, guarding millenary secrets away from the world. There were also slightly more picturesque stories. One of them claimed that the island was inhabited by giant dark rabbits, and also by a solitary wizard who resided in a stone castle. These last descriptions come from alleged witnesses who swore they had been to the island. Toward the end of the 15th century, at the same time Christopher Columbus was searching for western lands, sailors from the English city of Bristol made several voyages in search of this island. There are records of expeditions in 1480 and 1481 that set sail from Bristol, that is, toward the western Atlantic, with the hope of finding this legendary land. In fact, 1498 documents indicate that for 7 years, Bristol navigators had been searching for it without success. The most famous testimony dates from 1674. That year, the Scottish captain John Nisbeth claimed that during a voyage from France to Ireland, he sighted Hy-Brasil and landed on it. According to his account, he spent a day exploring the island and found, indeed, an idyllic land. He reportedly met an old wise man who gave him gold and silver coins. Nisbeth described the island as being inhabited by large black rabbits and by a single man who lived in a castle, which matched the legends. Shortly after, another captain named Alexander Johnson also claimed to have reached Hy-Brasil and corroborated the presence of the mysterious giant rabbits and a sorcerer. These stories were spread at the time, fueling the belief that the island was not just a myth, but a real place, albeit difficult to find. Despite these claims, the cartographic community lost faith in the island's existence as time went on. As maps became more accurate in the 17th century, Hy-Brasil disappeared from them. The last known map that includes it dates from 1865, where it appears marked as Brazil Rock. By then, many already considered it simply a legend. However, there was one last recorded sighting in 1872, when some sailors reportedly claimed to have seen it on the horizon before it vanished again. One theory suggests that Hy-Brasil could have been a submarine bank that in the remote past was above sea level. In fact, in 1862, a sandbank was discovered in the Atlantic, about 200 kilometers west of Ireland, that is located only 200 meters below the surface. Shortly after, in 1870, a scientist suggested to the Geological Society of Ireland that this sandbank could be the root of the Hy-Brasil legend, that perhaps thousands of years ago, when the sea level was lower, this area was visible, but after the last glacial period, it remained submerged. Another possible explanation for the sightings of this island is that under certain atmospheric conditions, mirages known as fata morgana can occur, which can make objects or lands appear on the horizon that are actually beyond the Earth's curvature. The sailors who reported seeing Hy-Brasil perhaps saw light refractions projected from distant islands in the form of land. Adding this to the predisposition to believe in the existence of the island, they could have interpreted a mirage as the legendary ghost island. Of course, supernatural theories also exist, and there are those who believe that Hy-Brasil is a real place and that it is enchanted, or that it moves or exists on a parallel plane. Today, this island remains a historical enigma. There are no physical remains that corroborate its existence, but its constant presence on maps for more than 500 years indicates that for many people it was more than a myth. For now, the fog seems to continue to envelop this island, without making it clear if it ever existed, or if it is just a collective mirage that lasted for several centuries. Unidentified submerged objects. When we talk about inexplicable phenomena at sea, we don't just refer to interdimensional islands or lost ships. There are also other types of mysteries that involve strange lights, and inexplicable objects. We now enter the territory of the so-called USOs, that is, unidentified submerged objects. In essence, they are the marine equivalent of UFOs, things seen in the water that have not been identified and are often associated with the unknown or potentially extraterrestrial. There are records of strange phenomena under the waters from long before the UFO phenomenon gained strength in the middle of the last century. Ancient sailors already spoke of ghostly lights at sea, and there is no shortage of chronicles of ships that saw green or white glows moving beneath the surface on dark nights. For example, in 1879, in the Persian Gulf, the crew of the British ship Vulture, under the command of Commander E. Pringle, observed during the night enormous luminous probes that were in the water and moving at high speed, forming what they described as a gigantic wheel of light that was spinning beneath the surface. In February 1960, the Argentine Navy lived an unsettling incident in the Golfo Nuevo, near the Patagonian coast. They detected what they thought were two submerged submarines, and for 2 weeks they pursued them insistently, as they maneuvered strangely. At every attempt to locate them, these submarines showed incredible capabilities. They moved with speed, changed course with agility, and seemed to submerge to depths that were greater than any other known submarine could withstand. Initially, they suspected they could be Soviet submarines operating undercover, as we were in the middle of the Cold War. But the performance observed exceeded what was humanly possible for the engineering of that time. Even 8 months earlier, the Argentine Navy had had another encounter where divers described an object under the water that had the shape of a silver fish and a large size, also with a kind of vertical fin that had also escaped. In the end, nothing was captured, and officially the cause was not identified. In 1963, in the North Atlantic during military maneuvers, the American aircraft carrier USS Wasp and 12 other warships detected on their sonars the presence of a craft under the water, moving at an absolutely astonishing speed. According to the reports of that incident, the submerged object was traveling at approximately 150 knots, that is, almost 280 kilometers per hour under the water, a speed unthinkable even today for a submersible. And most incredible of all, it had descended to about 8,000 meters deep without apparently suffering any damage. To put this in perspective, no military submarine can operate even remotely at that depth. For example, the Mariana Trench is 11,000 meters deep, and the best submarines do not exceed 1,000 meters in operational depth. The object was performing maneuvers near the fleet for a long time, and then disappeared. This event left the sailors perplexed. No explanation, no remains, nor confirmation of any experimental vehicle was ever found. Many cite this as evidence of non-human technology that was underwater. In 1967, in Nova Scotia, several witnesses, including pilots and officers, observed bright orange lights in the sky that then descended and seemed to submerge just off the coast. A great impact was heard, and when the Canadian authorities conducted searches in the water, they found a strange yellowish foam that was floating, but there was no trace of the craft. For days, Navy divers searched for the alleged remains of a crashed plane, to no avail. To this day, it is speculated that it was a UFO that fell into the sea, thus becoming a USO upon escaping underwater. In 1969, off the coast of Murcia, Spain, the crew of a Spanish fishing boat captained by Francisco Simo lived moments of terror one night when something underwater hooked their nets and began to drag the boat out to sea with overwhelming force. The sailors barely managed to cut the nets in time and thus avoided sinking. They then gave notice to the authorities, and the Spanish Navy sent ships to the rescue. But the mysterious being or object had already disappeared into the depths. The possibility of it being a foreign submarine was considered, but again, the power exhibited and the invisibility of the object, which never emerged, made it a full-blown USO case. In 1965, in the Chilean Antarctic, personnel from Chilean, Argentine, and British bases saw together a luminous wheel that was moving under the icy sea. That same year in Australia, a cylindrical object was spotted emerging briefly off the coast of Queensland. In Denmark, in 1967, 2 young people saw something fall into the sea, and later a strange residue was recovered on the beach, a kind of metallic mud. While it is true that many of these sightings could be explained by bioluminescence phenomena, others are simply inexplicable. Although there are many more cases and testimonies of sightings, it is worth mentioning that officially, an investigation into USOs, as extensive as the one into UFOs, has never been created. For example, Project Blue Book in the United States focused on aerial phenomena, but not maritime ones. Naval forces tend to handle these incidents in silence, archiving them if they do not affect immediate security. So the USO topic has been somewhat forgotten, even by those dedicated to researching strange phenomena, the Challenger Deep and its inhabitants. The Challenger Deep in the Mariana Trench is the deepest known point of the Earth's oceans, where the sea reaches about 11 kilometers of depth below the surface. To imagine it, let's think that if we placed Mount Everest at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, its summit would still be submerged under more than 2 kilometers of water. The Challenger Deep owes its name to the British ship HMS Challenger, which in 1875 performed the first depth measurements of this trench during a pioneering scientific expedition. Since then, it was known that this place near the Mariana Islands in the western Pacific was the oceanic abyss par excellence. The conditions at the bottom are unimaginable. There is total darkness, temperatures near the freezing point, and a pressure of approximately 1,100 atmospheres. This is equivalent to supporting the weight of 1,100 kilograms for every square centimeter. For decades, scientists even doubted that multicellular life could exist at such a depth. It was thought that perhaps only extremophile microorganisms could withstand living there. The first surprise came in 1960, when the bathyscaphe Trieste, piloted by Jacques Piccard and Don Walsh, achieved a historic feat of descending to the Challenger Deep. Upon touching the muddy bottom at about 10,916 meters, its occupants looked out the window and reported having seen what looked like a flatfish, similar to a sole, moving slowly, and also a pair of crustaceans. That report caused a stir. Over time, some scientists questioned this observation, as it was possible that the explorers were mistaken and believed they saw a fish, when in reality it could be something else. Even so, the submersible demonstrated for the first time that there were life forms even in the trench, as remains of small shrimp or amphipods were found in the sediment sample they collected. Many decades passed until the Challenger Deep was visited again. In 2012, filmmaker and explorer James Cameron descended solo in a specially designed submersible. There, he confirmed that the bottom is a cold and silent desert with a landscape of fine gray sediment. Cameron did not see fish, but his cameras recorded tiny organisms. But the finding most discussed from this dive, however, was not a mysterious creature, but something sadly mundane. A plastic wrapper lying on the sediment, evidence that the human footprint had reached the most remote point of the ocean. In more recent years, explorers like Victor Vescovo in 2019 confirmed that even in the Challenger Deep, there is life adapted to extreme conditions. Chemosynthetic microbes were found that survive without light, feeding on chemical compounds at the bottom. Xenophyophores were also found, enormous single-celled amoebas up to 10 centimeters in size. Among the most surprising inhabitants is the Mariana snailfish, a small, boneless, and transparent fish recorded at about 8,000 meters deep, considered the fish that lives at the greatest depth, as beyond that mark, known life is reduced to invertebrates like shrimp, worms, anemones, and microbes. Even so, every expedition continues to discover new things. In 2016, a mysterious sound nicknamed biotwang was captured, possibly from an unidentified whale or some abyssal fish. Less than 20 people have been able to physically descend to this abyss, and most of the trench remains unexplored. The few beings we know inhabit this site are very small but incredibly resilient. The Challenger Deep remains one of the great enigmas of humanity, and not for paranormal reasons, but because of how little we currently know about the true bottom of the sea. The sounds, Train and Julia. During the Cold War, the United States deployed a network of ultra-sensitive underwater hydrophones called SOSUS, intended to detect Soviet submarines through their noises in the ocean. But starting in the 90s, with the Cold War over, this network began to be used for scientific purposes by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, to monitor natural sounds of the ocean, submarine volcanoes, ice movements, whale songs, among other things. It was thus that they discovered a series of unidentified sounds of great range. The most famous is the so-called bloop, which turned out to be probably the sound of an enormous iceberg cracking according to subsequent analyses. But there are others that have remained more enigmatic for a time. Train was recorded on the 5th of March 1997. The name is due to the fact that when accelerating the recording, the sound recalls the rhythmic noise of a train on rails. It was detected by SOSUS in the South Equatorial Pacific, and NOAA technicians located it near the Ross Sea in Antarctica, near Cape Adare. Basically, it is a continuous and powerful hum whose frequency changes slightly, resembling that distant sound of a train at night, only underwater. Train lasted several minutes and was intense enough to be picked up by multiple hydrophones thousands of kilometers away. At that time, it was not known what caused it, and nothing identical had been recorded before. Julia, for its part, was recorded on the 1st of March 1999. That name is said to have been given because some engineers commented that it sounded like a drowned female voice saying Julia, which increases the creepiness of this matter. It was a sound of about 15 seconds in duration, with an ascending and then descending tone. Most notably, NOAA reported that the source of the sound seemed to come from some colossal creature due to the resemblance of this noise to a roar. At least this is according to their words. Julia was powerful enough to be detected throughout the Pacific hydrophone system, which means it had to be a really big acoustic event. By approximate triangulation, they situated the origin of the sound between Bransfield Strait and Cape Adare, that is, in waters near Antarctica, on the edge of the Ross Sea, more or less in the same general region as train. By playing Julia at a higher speed, one could hear a strange guttural roar that led some creative minds to imagine that it could be the cry of a gigantic and unknown marine creature. From there arose the legend of the supposed Julia beast, a monster that would have emitted that sound and that would be hiding in the depths. And so, for some years, train, Julia, and other sounds were debated intensely. In fact, it was the lack of immediate data that fueled the speculation. On the internet, even false stories circulated. For example, it was said that NASA satellites had photographed a huge shadow underwater, coinciding with the Julia sound, thus hinting at a creature the size of a city. Over time, scientists have been leaning toward more natural explanations. NOAA subsequently stated that the train sound has the characteristics of signals produced by Antarctic ice that is moving. It is likely, therefore, that it is the noise of a large iceberg, dragging on the rocky seabed, generating a prolonged screech, similar to that of a train. And as for Julia, NOAA experts concluded that it was most likely that its origin was also an enormous iceberg that fractured or ran aground near Antarctica. In essence, a block of ice, the size of a skyscraper breaking or scraping the seabed, can release sound energy so tremendous that it propagates through the water over enormous distances. However, there are those who still feel that an absolute certainty is missing. The hydrophones continue to detect strange sounds very occasionally. For example, there is one nicknamed Upsweep, and others emit series of ascending tones from a volcanic region of the Pacific. This is still without a definitive explanation. Furthermore, in the case of Julia, the detail that it sounded like a living being left several researchers uneasy. Of course, auditory pareidolia can play tricks on us. Just as we see faces in the clouds, we can hear voices in natural noises. But some mystery enthusiasts point out that we do not know all marine species, that perhaps Julia could have been hypothetically the song of a gigantic species of whale still undiscovered. In an ocean so vast, there could still exist unusual creatures in still unexplored zones. And although the most logical explanation points to ice and geology, those strange sounds captured at the bottom of the sea continue to fascinate the world, whether they are natural sounds of colossal icebergs or the unknown voices of beings that continue to call to us from the depths. Thank you for subscribing, leaving your like, and following us on social networks. We hope you have enjoyed these mysteries. And without more to say, I say goodbye. See you later.